The receipt landed on the cracked vinyl booth, the black ink harsh against the white paper. A single brutal line slashed through the tip section. 0. Nothing. The other servers at Rosie's diner exchanged knowing glances as the man in the expensive suit strode toward the exit, his leather shoes clicking against the checkerboard floor. Hannah felt her chest tighten, the weight of her toddler on her hip suddenly unbearable. She needed that money, desperately needed it for Toby's specialist appointment next week. But as she reached for the plate with trembling fingers, something caught her eye. A folded napkin, deliberately placed beneath the cold ceramic. It wasn't money. It was a message written in sharp, precise handwriting, 11 words that would pull her into a world she didn't know existed. And the man who left it? He wasn't just another wealthy customer with impossible standards. He was a test that every other woman in his life had already failed. Before we continue, I've noticed that many of you enjoy watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please help support and grow this channel by liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing if you enjoy the stories. Thank you so much, and God bless you. Now, let's get back to the story. Hannah's shift had started at 5 in the morning, and by noon, her body was already staging a rebellion. Toby had been up half the night with a fever, his small chest heaving with each labored breath, and she'd spent the hours before dawn alternating between checking his temperature and staring at the ceiling, calculating bills she couldn't pay. Now he clung to her left hip, his sweaty cheek pressed against her collarbone, while her right hand balanced a tray loaded with plates that were too hot and too heavy. The lunch crowd at Rosie's was brutal on Wednesdays. Construction workers from the highway project, truckers passing through, and the occasional business type who got lost looking for the upscale bistro 2 miles down the road. Hannah moved through the chaos like a dancer who'd forgotten the steps, her body operating on muscle memory while her mind counted hours until Toby's next dose of medication. "Hannah, you're slowing down," Darla barked from behind the register, her voice cutting through the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the grill. "Table 9 needs refills. Table 3 is still waiting for their check. And for God's sake, can't someone else watch that kid?" Hannah bit back the response that burned in her throat. There was no someone else. There had never been anyone else. She grabbed the coffee pot with her free hand, Toby's weight shifting as she moved, and started making rounds. Table 9. Table 3. Table 7 needed ketchup. Table 5 wanted extra napkins. Her lower back screamed with each step, and Toby was starting to whimper, that soft precursor to a full meltdown that she couldn't afford right now. She was refilling water glasses at table 8 when she noticed him. The man in booth 12 hadn't moved in 20 minutes. His coffee sat untouched, his hands folded on the table with unnatural stillness. But it wasn't Peter Hales who caught her attention in that moment. It was the man who'd just slid into the booth directly behind him. The newcomer wore a nondescript jacket and baseball cap pulled low, and something about the way he sat made Hannah's skin prickle. She developed a sixth sense over the past year, the kind of hypervigilance that came with being a single mother in a world that felt increasingly hostile. She noticed things. The way people position themselves, the tension in their shoulders, the direction of their gaze. This man was watching Peter Hales with the focus of a predator. Hannah moved closer, pretending to wipe down an empty table. The man in the cap had ordered water, and it sat sweating on his table, untouched. But his hand kept moving to his jacket pocket, a nervous gesture that repeated every 30 seconds. His eyes never left Peter's back. Then she saw it, a small vial, no bigger than her thumb, emerging briefly from the man's pocket before disappearing again. Her heart lurched. She'd seen a news report last month about corporate espionage, about rivals using untraceable toxins in public places. The story had terrified her because it meant the world was even more dangerous than she'd thought, and she'd filed it away in the mental folder marked, "Things that can hurt Toby." Peter Hales stood, reaching for his water glass. The man in the cap leaned forward slightly, his body coiled with anticipation. Hannah didn't think. She moved. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir." She lurched forward, Toby bouncing against her hip, and her elbow knocked Peter's water glass sideways. It tipped, spilling across the table in a cold cascade that soaked the napkins and dripped onto the vinyl seat. "I'm so clumsy today. I'm so sorry. Let me get you a fresh glass right away." Peter's silver eyes locked onto hers, and for a heartbeat, she saw something flicker in their depths. Not anger, recognition. Then his gaze shifted past her shoulder to the man in the cap, who was now standing abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "No need," Peter said, his voice calm and measured. "I was just leaving." The man in the cap was already moving toward the exit, his pace just slightly too fast to be casual. Peter watched him go, then turned back to Hannah. His expression was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice dropped to a register that made her spine straighten. "Interesting reflexes, Hannah." He placed the $50 bill on the table. "Very interesting." Then he was gone, and Hannah was left standing in the wreckage of spilled water, her heart hammering against her ribs, Toby crying softly in her arms, and the absolute certainty that she'd just done something that would change everything. The parking garage beneath Hales Tower was a cathedral of concrete and shadows, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that hummed like trapped insects. Hannah's footsteps echoed as she walked deeper into the structure, Toby asleep in her arms, his breathing soft and slightly wheezy against her neck. It was 12:03 in the morning. She was late. She had to wait for the neighbor's teenage daughter to come home before she could leave, and the girl had been 20 minutes past curfew. A black town car sat idling in the center of the empty level, its windows tinted so dark they looked like pools of oil. Hannah's instinct screamed at her to turn around, to run back to her cramped apartment and forget the napkin note entirely. But then she thought of the pharmacy bill, the specialist appointment, the sound of Toby struggling to breathe at 3 in the morning. The rear door opened before she reached it. Peter Hales sat in the back seat, his suit jacket removed, his white shirt crisp despite the late hour. "You came," he said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost like approval. "Get in."
Hannah hesitated.
"I'm not leaving my son. I wouldn't expect you to." He gestured to the seat beside him. "That's why you're here." She climbed in, adjusting Toby's sleeping weight as the door closed behind her with a solid thunk that sounded too much like a cage locking. The car didn't move. Peter pressed a button, and a privacy screen rose between them and the driver. "You saved my life today," Peter said, his silver eyes fixed on her face. "Do you understand that?" Hannah's throat tightened. "I spilled a glass of water. You identified a threat that 3 of my personal security team missed. A man who'd been paid $50,000 to introduce a neurotoxin into my drink. A substance that would have caused a seizure within minutes and left no trace in an autopsy." He leaned forward slightly, and Hannah caught a scent that shouldn't have been possible, something wild and clean, like pine forests and winter air. "How did you know?" "I didn't know. He was watching you wrong. The way predators watch prey." She stopped, realizing how insane that sounded. "I have a son. You learn to see danger." The mother's instinct. Peter's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Exactly what I need." "For what?" He pulled a tablet from the seat pocket and swiped through several screens before turning it toward her. The display showed organizational charts, financial reports, and photographs of men and women in expensive suits. "My company is hemorrhaging money. Someone in my inner circle is stealing from me from the pack and covering their tracks brilliantly. My security team can't find them. My accountants can't find them. Everyone I trust is either compromised or blind to the threat because they're too close to it." Hannah stared at the screen, at numbers that meant nothing to her and faces she didn't recognize. "I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about corporate finance." "You don't need to." Peter's voice dropped lower, taking on that commanding edge that made her spine straighten involuntarily. You know how to read people. You see what others miss because you've been trained by necessity to spot threats before they materialize. You're not Pac, Hannah. You're not clouded by politics or alliances or the games that shifters play for status. You're an outsider with the one skill I need most right now. Shifters? The word came out as barely a whisper. Peter's eyes flashed, catching the dim light in a way that was distinctly inhuman.
Yes.
Welcome to the world beneath the world. I'm the alpha of the Hales pack, the most powerful shifter family in the Northwest. And someone is trying to destroy everything I've built. Hannah's arms tightened around Toby. Every rational cell in her body screamed that this was insane, that she should demand to be let out of the car immediately. But Peter was still talking, and the numbers he mentioned next cut through her panic like a blade. 1 week. Find the leak, and I'll pay for your son's medical treatment. All of it. The specialist, the medication, the surgery he'll eventually need. I'll set up a trust fund that ensures he never wants for anything. Peter's gaze dropped to Toby's sleeping face, and something softened in his expression. Children are precious, Hannah. I protect what's mine. Help me protect my pack, and I'll protect your cub. You have my word as an alpha. Hannah looked down at Toby, at his small chest rising and falling, at the bluish tin around his lips that the doctors said would get worse without treatment. She thought about the pharmacy bills, the eviction notice she'd received last week, the constant, gnawing terror that she wouldn't be enough to save him. 1 week, she whispered. 1 week, Peter confirmed. Starting now. The executive floor of Hales Tower was a study in controlled perfection. Glass walls, steel fixtures, and silence so absolute that Hannah could hear her own heartbeat. Everything was sharp angles and cold surfaces, the kind of space designed to make people feel small. Hannah felt microscopic. She stood in the center of Peter's outer office at 7 in the morning. Toby perched on her hip with a package of crackers clutched in his sticky hands and tried not to touch anything that looked expensive, which was everything. You can't be serious. The voice was silk wrapped around a blade. Hannah turned to see a woman emerging from the inner sanctum, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots. She was stunning in a way that felt weaponized, dark hair pulled into a severe chignon, a burgundy suit that probably cost more than Hannah's car, and eyes that assessed Hannah the way someone might examine a stain on expensive upholstery. Peter, tell me this is a joke. Peter didn't look up from the documents he was reviewing. Elena, meet Hannah Brooks. She'll be working as my personal consultant for the next week. Hannah, this is Elena Volkov, Vice President of Operations and my PAC's Master of Ceremonies. Elena's smile was all teeth and no warmth. A consultant. How fascinating. Her gaze dropped to Toby, who was currently trying to eat a cracker while simultaneously wiping crumbs on Hannah's shoulder. And I see we're implementing a new Bring Your Child to Work policy. How very progressive. He goes where I go, Hannah said, meeting Elena's stare with the kind of exhausted defiance that came from 2 years of judgment. If that's a problem. It's not, Peter interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Elena, Hannah will need access to the quarterly reports, supply chain manifests, and personnel files for the executive team. Have them sent to the conference room by 9. Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. Though I'm curious what qualifications she paused, her eyes raking over Hannah's discount store blouse and the spit-up stain near her collar. Consultant brings to financial analysis. Fresh eyes, Peter said. That's all you need to know. The next 3 hours were a baptism by spreadsheet. Hannah sat in a glass-walled conference room with Toby building towers from paper clips on the floor beside her, staring at numbers that blurred together into meaningless columns. She wasn't an accountant. She could barely balance her own checkbook. But Peter had said she didn't need to understand the money, She needed to understand the people behind it. So she started looking for patterns in behavior instead of numbers. Purchase orders approved at odd hours. Supply requisitions that came in duplicate from different departments. Vendor contracts signed by executives who shouldn't have had authorization. And there, buried in the third quarter logistics reports, she found something strange. A shipping company called Cascade Transit Solutions appeared 47 times in the manifests, always for small amounts, never enough to trigger an audit alert. But the delivery addresses were peculiar. Vacant lots, abandoned warehouses, a residential address in Lake Oswego that belonged, according to a quick phone search, to a shell corporation. Hannah was still staring at the pattern when Elena appeared in the doorway, her expression carved from ice. Find anything interesting? Or are you just rearranging papers to look productive? Who authorized these shipments? Hannah asked, pointing to the Cascade transit entries. Elena's eyes narrowed. Those are routine supply deliveries. Medical equipment for our employee wellness program. To a vacant lot on Harbor Avenue? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena stepped inside, closing the door behind her with deliberate care. Toby looked up from his paper-clip tower, sensing the shift in atmosphere with the instinct of a child who'd learned to read danger. You need to be very careful, Hannah. Elena's voice was soft now, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. You're playing in a world you don't understand. Peter may have brought you here as some kind of experiment, but the pack has rules, hierarchies, and humans who overstep their place tend to find themselves removed. Hannah stood, pulling Toby up into her arms. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her voice steady. These addresses don't match the invoices. The quantities are too consistent to be random. And the approval signatures, she pointed to the screen, they're all yours. Elena smiled, and it was the most frightening expression Hannah had ever seen. You should go home, little waitress. Before someone decides your son would be safer without such a reckless mother. Then she turned and walked out, leaving Hannah alone with a screen full of evidence and the absolute certainty that she'd just made a very powerful enemy. It was 10:30 at night when Hannah finally admitted defeat. Toby had fallen asleep on the leather couch in Peter's office 2 hours ago, his small body curled around a stuffed wolf that had mysteriously appeared on Peter's desk that afternoon. Hannah had been cross-referencing shipping manifests with employee time cards, trying to find the pattern that would prove Elena's involvement, but her eyes were burning and the numbers had stopped making sense 3 spreadsheets ago. You should rest, Peter said from across the room. He'd been working in silence beside her for hours, his presence both comforting and unsettling in ways Hannah didn't want to examine. You've been staring at that same cell for 10 minutes.
I've fine.
Hannah rubbed her eyes, knowing it was a lie. She hadn't been fine in 2 years. Maybe longer. She heard him move, felt the displacement of air as he crossed the room, and then he was sitting beside her, close enough that she could smell that impossible scent of winter forests. Hannah.
Rest.
The work will be here in the morning. I only have 4 more days. Her voice cracked slightly. If I don't find enough evidence, you will. He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. You're the first person in 3 months to identify the Cascade transit pattern. Elena has been careful, but you saw through it in less than 6 hours. That's not luck. That's instinct. Hannah looked over at Toby, at his chest rising and falling in the peaceful rhythm of sleep. Why are you really doing this? You could hire actual investigators, forensic accountants, people who know what they're doing. Peter followed her gaze to the sleeping child. Because investigators can be bought. Accountants can be intimidated. But a mother protecting her cub? His voice dropped to something almost reverent. That's incorruptible. That's the most dangerous force in nature. Something in Hannah's chest tightened. She'd spent so long feeling powerless, feeling like she was drowning in a world designed to crush people like her. But the way Peter looked at her in that moment, like she was strong instead of desperate, made her feel like maybe she'd been wrong about her own capacity for strength. "He likes you," Hannah said quietly, nodding toward Toby. "He doesn't usually warm up to strangers. He knows I'm Pac." Peter stood and moved to the couch, crouching beside the sleeping toddler with surprising gentleness. He adjusted the blanket someone had draped over Toby's small form, his large hands careful and precise. Children can sense what adults try to hide. He knows I'd protect him, just like his mother does. Hannah watched him, this powerful alpha who commanded boardrooms and ran a billion-dollar empire, tucking a blanket around her son with the tenderness of someone who understood what it meant to be vulnerable. Her heart did something dangerous in her chest, something that felt like hope and terror braided together. "Peter." He looked up, and the expression in his silver eyes stole her breath. It wasn't the cold assessment from the diner. It was heat and hunger, and something that felt like recognition. Like he'd been searching for something, and had finally found it in the most unexpected place. "You should know," he said, his voice rough, "that you're making this very difficult for me." "Making what difficult?" "Keeping this professional." He stood slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You walk into my world with your fierce protectiveness and your ability to see through the lies that everyone else accepts, and you expect me to stay detached. To treat this like a simple transaction." Hannah's breath caught. She should step back. Should remind him that she was just a waitress he'd hired for a week, that there were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. "I should leave," she whispered, but it came out like a question. "You should." Peter took a step closer, and the air between them felt charged. "But I don't want you to." The moment stretched between them, fragile and dangerous. Then Toby shifted in his sleep, making a small sound, and reality crashed back. Hannah blinked, stepping backward, her professional mask sliding back into place like armor. "It's late. I should get him home." Peter nodded, but something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. "I'll have my driver take you. It's not safe this late." As Hannah gathered Toby and her scattered papers, she didn't see Elena standing in the darkened hallway beyond the glass wall, her phone raised, capturing every moment of a scene she'd just witnessed. Didn't see the cold satisfaction in Elena's smile as she typed a message to the board of directors, attaching the photos of Peter and his consultant in what could easily be interpreted as an inappropriate late-night encounter. The frame was already in motion. Hannah knew something was wrong the moment she walked into Hales' tower on Thursday morning. The usual hum of activity on the executive floor had been replaced by a tense silence, and the security guards at the elevator bank watched her with expressions that fell somewhere between pity and suspicion. Toby squirmed on her hip, sensing her anxiety, his small fingers gripping her collar tighter than usual. "Ms. Brooks." The head of security, a granite-faced man named Marcus Thorne, stepped into her path before she could reach Peter's office. "I need you to come with me." "What's this about?" Hannah's stomach dropped. "I have work to do. Now, Ms. Brooks." His tone left no room for argument. They led her to a sterile conference room where her diaper bag sat on the table like evidence at a crime scene. The bag was unzipped, its contents spread across the polished surface. Diapers, wipes, Toby's spare clothes, and a manila envelope that Hannah had never seen before in her life. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Thorne opened the envelope with gloved hands and pulled out a stack of documents. Even from across the table, Hannah could see the red confidential stamps across the top of each page. "These are classified merger details for the Hales Pacific Technologies acquisition. Documents that are only accessible to C-suite executives and board members. Can you explain how they ended up in your personal bag?" The room tilted. "I've never seen those before." I wouldn't." The documents were printed from your assigned workstation at 11:47 last night. Your keycard shows you were still in the building. Security footage shows you leaving with this bag at 11:52. Thorne's expression was professionally neutral, but Hannah could see the judgment beneath it. Ms. Brooks, corporate espionage is a serious crime. If you've been approached by a competitor, I didn't take those documents. Hannah's voice rose, and Toby started crying, startled by her tone. She tried to soothe him while her mind raced, trying to understand how this was happening. Someone planted them. Elena, Vice President Volkov. She threatened me yesterday. She said I was overstepping. Elena Volkov has been with this company for 12 years. She's Pac. You've been here 3 days. Thorne collected the documents, sliding them back into the envelope. The board has been notified. Alpha Hales is in an emergency session with the council now. They escorted her to a waiting area, and for 2 hours Hannah sat with Toby on her lap, watching through glass walls as men and women in expensive suits moved through the hallways with purpose and cold efficiency. She tried calling Peter's direct line 3 times. It went straight to voicemail. She tried texting. No response. When Peter finally emerged from the boardroom, his face was carved from stone. Hannah stood, hope and dread warring in her chest, but he walked past her without meeting her eyes, followed by a delegation of severe-looking executives. Elena was among them, her expression perfectly calibrated to show concerned disappointment. Mr. Hales, Peter, please, I didn't do this, Hannah called after him, her voice breaking.
He stopped,
Turned, and the look in his silver eyes was the worst thing Hannah had ever seen. Not anger, but resignation.
Defeat.
The board has demanded your immediate termination and removal from all company properties. If you contest this decision, they'll file criminal charges for corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets. You know I didn't do this. Hannah's voice dropped to a whisper. You know. Something flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it.
Pain.
What I know doesn't matter. The evidence is clear. The board wants blood, and if I don't give them yours, they'll call for a vote of no confidence. I'll lose everything, the company, my position as Alpha, my ability to protect the pack. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear.
I'm sorry, Hannah.
But I can't save you from this. The safe house, Hannah managed. Toby's medication is there, his clothes. You have 2 hours to collect your belongings. Peter's tone was formal now, professional, like she was a stranger instead of someone he'd almost kissed 12 hours ago. After that, building security will change the locks. He turned and walked away, flanked by his executives, and Hannah stood frozen in the center of the gleaming hallway, holding her crying son, surrounded by the wreckage of a life she'd barely begun to build. Elena passed by, close enough that Hannah could smell her expensive perfume, and leaned in to whisper, I told you to be careful, little waitress. Some worlds aren't meant for people like you. Then she was gone, and Hannah was left with nothing but 2 hours to pack and the crushing weight of knowing she'd been set up perfectly and no one, not even the Alpha King himself, had the power to save her. The apartment felt even smaller than Hannah remembered, the walls pressing in with the weight of failure. She'd managed to scrape together enough for half the rent, just barely, but the eviction notice was still taped to her door, a countdown to homelessness that now felt inevitable. Toby's medication sat on the counter, 3 days' worth left in the bottle. After that, nothing. No backup plan. No miracle waiting in the wings. Darla had given her the lunch shift back at Rosie's without asking questions, though the look in her eyes said she'd heard about Hannah's spectacular fall from grace. The diner gossip network was faster than any newswire. By Friday afternoon, Hannah was back in her stained uniform, pouring coffee for truckers and pretending her hands weren't shaking every time someone left less than $1 tip. She was refilling napkin dispensers during the 3 o'clock lull when Marcus, the line cook, tossed a newspaper onto the counter. You see this? Some fancy gala last night for the Hales Foundation. Your old boss made the society pages. Hannah almost didn't look. She didn't want to see Peter in his tuxedo, smiling for cameras, pretending she'd never existed. But something made her flip to the lifestyle section, and there it was, a full-color photo from the Children's Hospital fundraiser. Peter stood in the center, flanked by board members and executives. And beside him, resplendent in a silver gown that probably cost more than Hannah's car, was Elena Volkov. But it wasn't Elena's dress that made Hannah's breath catch. It was the jewelry. A stunning antique brooch pinned to Elena's shoulder, an intricate piece featuring a wolf rendered in platinum and diamonds, its eyes two flawless emeralds. The caption identified it as a rare Imperial Russian piece, circa 1890, recently acquired at private auction. Hannah stared at the image, her mind racing. She'd seen that brooch before. Not in person, but in the manifests she'd been reviewing. There'd been a line item buried in the Cascade transit shipping logs. Antique acquisition, wolf brooch, Imperial Russian, 1890. The purchase price had been listed as $47,000, paid through one of the shell corporations she'd flagged as suspicious. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone and zoomed in on the photo. The brooch was unmistakable. Elena was wearing stolen property, not stolen money laundered through fake companies, but actual physical assets purchased with PAC funds and shipped to dummy addresses before being acquired personally. You okay? Marcus asked, eyeing her with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. Marcus, do you still have that cousin who works at Sterling Auctions downtown? He blinked. Tony? Yeah, why? I need a favor. A big one. Hannah's voice was steadier now, sharpened by purpose. Can he access purchase records? Specifically, for high-end estate jewelry sold in the last 6 months. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He owes me for covering his bachelor party tab. What are you looking for? Proof. It took 2 hours and a bottle of Marcus's good whiskey, but Tony came through. He met Hannah in the diner parking lot after his shift, carrying a manila folder that felt like salvation in paper form. This is seriously shady, Hannah. If my boss finds out I pulled these records. You're saving someone's life, Hannah said, taking the folder. Maybe more than one. Inside were 3 purchase receipts from Sterling Auctions, each one documenting the sale of high-value items, the Imperial Russian brooch, a pair of Georgian sapphire earrings, and an Art Deco diamond bracelet. The buyer was listed as Cascade Acquisitions LLC, the same shell corporation from the shipping manifests. But the payment method was what made Hannah's heart race. Each purchase had been authorized with a corporate card issued by Hales Industries, and each authorization signature belonged to Elena Volkov. Hannah spread the receipts across the diner counter under the harsh fluorescent lights, cross-referencing them with the photos she'd secretly taken of the shipping manifests before being escorted out. The dates matched. The amounts matched. The delivery addresses, all routed to Elena's private properties, matched. Elena hadn't been laundering money digitally. She'd been converting PAC assets into personal jewelry, using fake companies to obscure the paper trail, and wearing her stolen treasures in public because she believed she was untouchable. Because she was highborn PAC, and Hannah was just a human waitress that no one would believe. But Hannah had the receipts now. She had the shipping records. She had photographic evidence of Elena wearing stolen property at a public event. And she had 48 hours until the board's emergency meeting where they would formalize Peter's succession plan, the one that would almost certainly name Elena as his partner and co-alpha. Hannah looked down at Toby, sleeping in his carrier beside the counter, then back at the evidence spread before her. She'd been knocked down, humiliated, framed, and discarded. But she wasn't done fighting yet. The Ascension Gala was being held at the Sentinel Hotel's Grand Ballroom, a cathedral of crystal chandeliers and old money that made Hannah feel like an intruder the moment she stepped through the service entrance. She'd borrowed a black dress from Jessica, the same waitress who'd refused to serve Peter that first day, and pulled her hair into something resembling elegance. Toby was with a neighbor's daughter, safely away from whatever was about to happen. Hannah carried only a manila envelope, and the kind of desperate courage that came from having nothing left to lose. Security was tight, but Hannah had spent years being invisible to wealthy people. She slipped past the checkpoint by following a catering crew, her waitress instincts guiding her through the kitchen chaos and into the service corridor that led to the ballroom. She could hear music, the murmur of conversation, the clink of champagne glasses celebrating what they believed was a foregone conclusion. The ballroom was magnificent and terrible, filled with men and women who radiated power and privilege. They stood in clusters beneath the chandeliers, their formal wear immaculate, their postures speaking of hierarchies Hannah couldn't begin to understand. At the far end, on a raised dais, Peter stood beside Elena. She wore emerald silk that matched the eyes of the stolen brooch pinned to her shoulder, the same brooch from the newspaper photo, worn with arrogant confidence. Peter's expression was carefully neutral, but Hannah could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as someone from the board spoke into his ear. "Ladies and gentlemen," the board chairman's voice boomed through the microphone, silencing the crowd. "We gather tonight to witness a historic moment in the Hales pack legacy. Alpha Peter Hales will formally announce his chosen partner." "Stop." Hannah's voice cut through the ballroom, amplified by the acoustics of the vaulted ceiling. Every head turned toward her. "You need to stop this right now." Security moved immediately, two massive men converging on her position, but Peter raised one hand. "Wait." His silver eyes locked onto hers across the distance, and something flickered in their depths. "Let her speak." Hannah walked down the center aisle, her cheap heels clicking against marble, aware of every judgmental stare, every whispered comment about the human waitress who'd been fired for espionage. She reached the dais and held up the manila envelope. "Elena Volkov has been stealing from this pack for 18 months. Not through digital transfers, through physical asset conversion. She's been using shell corporations to purchase high-value items with pack funds, then claiming them as personal acquisitions." Elena laughed, the sound crystalline and dismissive. "This is pathetic, Peter. The woman you fired for corporate espionage is now making wild accusations? Have her removed." "I have proof." Hannah pulled out the auction receipts, holding them up for the crowd to see. 3 purchases from Sterling Auctions, totaling over $200,000. All authorized with Elena's corporate card. All shipped to addresses owned by her shell companies. And the Imperial Russian brooch she's wearing right now? That was purchased with pack funds 6 weeks ago for $47,000. The murmur in the crowd shifted from dismissive to uncertain. Elena's smile never wavered, but Hannah saw her hand move reflexively to the brooch. "Those are forgeries, obviously fabricated by someone desperate to save herself." "Then explain this." Hannah pulled out her phone, projecting a video onto the large screen behind the dais. The grainy footage showed the diner's parking lot at night, time-stamped from 2 weeks ago. Elena stood beside a black SUV, talking to a man Hannah recognized from the shipping manifests, Marcus Jun, CEO of a rival Pax investment firm. They exchanged a briefcase. The audio was faint, but Elena's words were clear enough. "The merger details are inside. Make sure your alpha knows I delivered as promised." The ballroom erupted. Board members surged forward, demanding explanations. Security moved toward Elena, who stepped back, her composure finally cracking. "This is a setup." She doctored that footage. "The timestamp matches the security logs from your keycard leaving Hales Tower that night," Peter said quietly, his voice carrying absolute authority. You told me you were meeting with the zoning commission. You lied. Peter, you can't possibly believe. The brooch. Peter's eyes were cold now, glacial with rage barely contained. Show me the purchase receipt. If it's legitimately yours, you'll have documentation. Elena's hand moved to her shoulder, fingers closing protectively around the stolen jewelry. For the first time since Hannah had met her, the vice president looked cornered. Desperate. I don't have to prove anything to a human. You have to prove it to your alpha. Peter descended from the dais, and the crowd parted before him like water. Remove the brooch, Elena.
Now.
The silence was absolute. Elena's hand trembled, then she unpinned the brooch with jerky movements and held it out. Peter took it, examined it under the chandelier light, then handed it to the board chairman. Have this authenticated and cross-referenced with Sterling Auctions records. I want a full forensic audit of every purchase Elena has authorized in the last 2 years. And I want her corporate access revoked immediately. This is a mistake, Elena hissed, her mask finally shattering. I am highborn. I was meant to be your partner. She's nothing, a human waitress with a sick child, and you're throwing away 12 years of loyalty for her word. Her word has been the only truth in this room tonight. Peter turned to the security team. Escort Ms. Volkov out. She'll be held pending the completion of the audit and formal charges. As security surrounded Elena, she locked eyes with Hannah, and the hatred there was so pure it felt physical. You've signed your death warrant, little waitress. The pack won't forget this. Neither will I, Hannah said quietly. They led Elena away, her emerald dress disappearing into the corridor, and the ballroom remained frozen in shocked silence. Peter stood at the center of it all, still holding Hannah's evidence, and when he finally looked at her, his expression was unreadable. You came back, he said. I had to. Hannah's voice shook. Not for me.
For you.
You needed the truth. I never doubted you. Peter stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. But I needed you to prove it to them. To show the pack that you were stronger than their politics. Hannah looked up at him, at the alpha king who'd tested her from the very beginning, and realized she'd passed every trial he'd set before her, not by being perfect, but by refusing to stay down. What happens now? She whispered. Peter's hand found hers, his fingers warm and certain. Now we rebuild. Together. The penthouse overlooked the city like a throne room in the clouds, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Portland's lights like scattered diamonds. Hannah stood at the glass, Toby asleep against her shoulder, still wearing the borrowed dress and cheap heels that had carried her through the most terrifying night of her life. Behind her, Peter dismissed the last of his security team with quiet authority, and then they were alone. You let them fire me, Hannah said without turning around. You let them threaten me with criminal charges. You watched me pack my things and leave with nothing. I did. Peter's reflection appeared in the glass beside hers. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done. Why? Her voice cracked. If you never doubted me. Because Elena needed to believe she'd won. If I defended you, she would have gone underground, covered her tracks more carefully. But with you gone, she got arrogant. Sloppy. He moved closer, his presence solid and warm at her back. I had my own investigators tracking her movements the moment you were escorted out. When she accessed the secure files to plant them in your bag, we documented everything. But I needed her to reveal her true alliance, the rival pack connection. That only happened because she thought she was safe. Hannah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. You used me as bait. I gave you freedom to hunt. His hand touched her shoulder, gentle but firm. If I'd kept you close, protected you openly, the pack would have watched your every move. But cast out, humiliated, dismissed, you became invisible again. And that's when you're most dangerous. She turned to face him, searching his eyes for the truth. The medical bills. Toby's treatment. Was any of that real? It's already done. Full coverage, specialist appointments scheduled, trust fund established in his name. Peter's expression softened. I keep my promises, Hannah. Always. The tension that had held her together for days finally broke. Hannah felt tears slide down her cheeks, silent and relieved. I thought I'd lost everything. I thought you believed. I believed in you from the moment you spilled that water glass. Peter cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Not because you're fearless, but because you're terrified every single day, and you still fight. That's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes you queen. Hannah's breath caught. Peter, I'm not asking you to be my consultant anymore. His voice dropped, becoming something raw and honest. I'm asking you to be my partner. In the company, in the pack, in life. I'm asking you to stand beside me as my equal, not my employee. I'm human. I don't know anything about pack politics or corporate warfare or... You know how to see truth through lies. You know how to protect what matters. And you know how to survive in a world designed to crush you. His forehead touched hers, and Hannah felt the tremor in his hands. I don't need another highborn shifter who plays political games. I need someone who reminds me why we fight in the first place. I need you. Hannah looked up at him, at the alpha king who tested her, trusted her, and ultimately freed her to prove her own strength. What about Toby? He's packed now. Under my protection always. Peter's hand moved to rest gently on Toby's back. I told you, Hannah. Children are precious. He'll want for nothing. She kissed him then, standing in her borrowed dress with her sleeping son between them, and it felt like coming home to a place she'd never known existed. 3 weeks later, Hannah walked into Rosie's diner with Peter beside her and Toby toddling between them, his small hands gripping their fingers. The lunch crowd stared. Of course they stared. The Alpha King didn't frequent roadside diners unless he had a reason. Darla's eyes went wide as they slid into booth 12, the same booth where it had all begun. Hannah, what are you? Just visiting, Hannah said with a smile. And having lunch. They ordered burgers and fries, and Peter ate without complaint, this man who'd once demanded steamed vegetables with no seasoning. Toby made a mess with ketchup, and Peter wiped his face with practiced ease, like he'd been doing it for years instead of weeks. When the check came, Peter placed 5 crisp $100 bills on the table, enough to cover a $15 meal with an absurd tip remainder. The new waitress, a young woman who looked as tired and desperate as Hannah once had, approached cautiously. Sir, this is too much. It's exactly right, Peter said, standing and offering his hand to Hannah.
Keep it.
And tell your manager that if she needs reliable childcare, the Hales Foundation just opened a subsidized program for working parents. Applications are available online. They walked out together, Toby chattering happily between them, and Hannah looked back once at the diner that had been her battlefield and her prison. It looked smaller now, less frightening, because she'd learned something in the chaos of the past month. Strength wasn't about never being knocked down. It was about getting back up again and again, until the world finally recognized you were never going to stay on the ground. She was Hannah Brooks, mother,
Partner. Queen.
and she was just getting started. If you enjoyed the story and want more like it, please like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Thank you for being here.